Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson on key concepts of European history. This is part 2 in a series of video lessons about these key concepts. Today we are covering period 4, 1914 to the present. All right, so in our first video lesson, we talked about total war and political instability, right? We talked about this first bullet right there. Today, we're going to talk about total war and economic collapse. And you combine those two things together, you get ideological battles between liberal democracy, communism, and fascism, okay? And in a subsequent video lesson, we're going to talk about the last 3 bullets. So, key concept 4.2 is where we're going to start. The stresses of economic collapse and total war engendered internal conflicts within European states and created conflicting conceptions of the relationship between the individual and the state, as demonstrated in the ideological battle among liberal democracy, communism, and fascism. So, the Russian Revolution, also known as the Bolshevik Revolution, created a regime based on Marxist-Leninist theory. So Vladimir Lenin, who was a leader of Russia, and Karl Marx is where you get that Marxist-Leninist theory. Now, the reason why communism is referred to, why we have Marxism versus communism, is because the theory put forth by Karl Marx is not what occurred in reality. So what we know as communism in the real world is not what Marx had in mind. So this is why what Marx argues or argued is no longer thought of as communism, it's thought of as Marxism. So this is where you get this Marxist-Leninist theory. So in Russia, World War I made long-term problems of political stagnation, social inequality, incomplete industrialization, and food and land distribution much worse, okay? This all contributed to creating the support for revolutionary change. A good point to note that regardless of how ridiculous some people think others' feelings are, when you have enough people who are unhappy and the extent of their unhappiness is great, whether you agree with them or not, whether you think it's stupid or not, if that unhappiness or resentment or if those issues are not addressed in some way at some point, you are going to have conflict. It may come in the form of a violent revolution, as was the case in the Bolsheviks, or it could come in other forms, such as nationwide riots and protests and things of that nature. But bottom line, the people will be heard, and you need to be careful, because sometimes what the people want or what the people fight for isn't exactly what they had in mind. This could certainly be argued of the Bolshevik Revolution. Military and worker insurrections, aided by the revived Soviets, undermined the provisional government, and they set the stage for Lenin's long-planned, Bolshevik Revolution and establishment of a communist state. Okay, Lenin was looking to do this for quite some time. He actually got exiled from the country for a while and then came back, and it was a big, huge drama mama fest. But we'll talk about that in more specific detail when we get to that unit. The Bolshevik takeover prompted a protracted civil war between communist forces and their opponents, and each side of these they were aided by foreign powers, which helped to tip the Bolshevik Revolution in favor of the Bolsheviks. The Russian, in order to improve economic performance, Lenin had to compromise on a lot of free market principles. And he did this via his policy, the new economic policy, which we'll discuss in great detail when we talk about this unit. After his death, though, Stalin undertook a centralized program of rapid economic modernization, which was successful to a point, but it came at a high price, as you will see. Down here in the second bullet, he liquidated the kulaks, there was famine in the Ukraine, purges of all his political rivals, unequal burdens placed on women, and the establishment of a very, very oppressive political system. Stalin, in an effort to make this happen, killed millions. I'm not exaggerating, millions of his own people in order to accomplish this. So it was successful to a point, but again, the price was very, very high. So the ideology of fascism, with its roots in the pre-World War I era, gained popularity in an environment of post-war bitterness. Welcome to the Treaty of Versailles and revenge-seeking allies. The rise of communism, uncertain transitions to democracy, and economic instability. Ladies and gentlemen, this is yet again another a piece of evidence showing you, that should show you, that revenge seeking is not the best way to go about things. It feels good in the moment. You know, you ever heard the old saying, you know, if it feels good saying it, it was probably the wrong thing to say, right? You know, you should pause and really think about what you're doing and not act out of emotion and this desire to get them, because this is what you get. You get fascist dictatorships. They used modern technology and propaganda that rejected democratic institutions. They promoted charismatic leaders, and they glorified war and nationalism to lure in those who were disillusioned. Now, the two prime examples of this are Mussolini and Hitler. They both rose to power by exploiting this post-war bitterness and this economic instability. They used terror and manipulated the fledgling and unpopular democracies in their countries and in the nations surrounding them. Now, Hitler was laughed out of the ballot box before this ridiculousness, okay? And then the German people got so desperate. The war reparations were so burdensome, and they just absolutely destroyed Germany, that Hitler comes in and says, hey, listen, punks, I'm going to make you a world power, and I'm going to fix this economy, and we're going to be moving and grooving, and it's going to be awesome, and Germany's going to be great. Everybody's like, well, everything sucks right now. I'd like Germany to be great. So they put the guy in office. Then they granted him emergency chancellor powers, and woo, poof, presto changeo, we have a fascist dictatorship in Germany. Okay? Now, he did what he promised. But my God, the price we had to pay for that. I mean, we paid the Holocaust for that. Well, we personally didn't pay it, but people did. So you must understand, you must learn these lessons that revenge does not get you what you want. It gets you this. It gets this. This is no good. An eye for an eye, we're all blind, as the saying goes, right? So this is what happens when people don't think through their decisions all the way through to their natural conclusion. It is imperative that we learn from these massive blunders in history so that we can make better choices in the future. Not necessarily to prevent history from repeating itself, because it doesn't, but in order to make ourselves better prepared to deal with the problems that we can't even conceive of yet. So, in addition to what was happening in Italy and Germany, you've got Franco's alliance with both the Italian and German fascists in the Spanish Civil War. All right, so Western democracies said, "Oh, it's not on us. We're not going to go there. We're isolationists now." So they didn't go there. They didn't touch it. This represented testing ground for World War II, and it did result in authoritarian rule in Spain from 1936 to the mid-1970s. So I know interventionism is a loaded idea, and it's fraught with peril, and it's really hard to discern when world nations should intervene and when they should not. But lack of intervention isn't always the answer. And if we don't learn the lessons of lack of intervention, we are going to reap unforeseen consequences from that. After failures to establish functioning democracies, authoritarian dictatorships took power in Central and Eastern Europe during this interwar period. Okay, so now instead of, whoops, lost my little guy here. Hold on a second, folks. Lost my little microphone. So now, instead of having functioning democracies, which we did not nourish or even think about how that would work in those countries, now we have authoritarian dictatorships instead, which is so much better, right? It's not so much better, just so that's sarcasm. Okay, so the Great Depression, caused by weaknesses in international trade and monetary theories and practices, undermined Western European democracies and fermented radical political responses throughout Europe. Enter socialism, communist ideologies, right? So World War I debt, nationalistic tariff policies, tariffs are bad. Okay, let's just pause right now. Just tariffs are bad. Okay, a nationwide, wide-ranging, nationalized, long-term tariff is going to destroy an economy. Tariffs are bad. Now, once you learn some basic economics, you will see this concept of comparative advantage. There are gains from trade. Okay, there are gains from trade, ladies and gentlemen. When you cut off trade, which you do by imposing tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports, for those of you who might not be aware. That's bad. I can show you in virtually every instance of massive, widespread long-term tariffs that directly led to a recession or a depression. Okay, tariffs are bad. So we have depreciated currencies, disrupted trade patterns, and speculation, all created weaknesses in worldwide economies, right? So dependence on post-World War American investment, because we were really the only ones who could. We made a lot of money off of World War I, and we didn't have any national destruction like Europe did. Once our investment capital went bye-bye with the financial collapse in 1929, also known as Black Tuesday, when we had the 1929 stock market crash, the United States cut off all the capital flows to Europe because it didn't really have any, didn't even have enough for itself. So this created a domino effect, was a watershed moment, and it resulted in pulling in the entire European continent into a worldwide depression. So Despite attempts to rethink economic theories and policies and forge political alliances, Western democracies largely failed to overcome the Great Depression and were weakened by extremist movements. Now, in the United States, they managed to pull through, but in Europe, there's going to be problems, and a lot of these problems are going to directly lead to World War II. Because you look at what Weimar is dealing with. Weimar's already like in serious trouble, and then the Great Depression hits. Forget about it; they're done. So, post-war economic growth supported an increase in welfare benefits, but subsequent economic stagnation led to criticism and limitation of the welfare state. All right, so now we fought World War II. Now we're in the post-World War II era, right? So Marshall Plan, the Marshall Plan funds, this was an initiative from the United States to basically rebuild Europe, okay? This financed an extensive reconstruction of industry and infrastructure and stimulated an extended period of growth in Western and Central Europe. It's often referred to as an economic miracle, which increased the economic and cultural importance of consumerism. The expansion of cradle to grave social welfare programs in the aftermath of World War II, accompanied by high taxes, became a contentious domestic political issue as the budgets of European nations came under pressure in the late 20th century. And now also, it's very, very difficult to sustain these welfare concepts economically. And there are arguments on each side, in whether you're perhaps liberal or conservative in terms of your political ideology, how much welfare we should have, if we should have any, if we should have lots. But the economic sustainability of many of these welfare programs is suspect. This is just mathematics. This isn't about ideology. This is about basic mathematics and economics. So during the post-war boom, this was an artificial boom. This was like a happy accident of history, and we kind of got used to it and assumed that would be the new normal. And now, in our current time period, we are readjusting after that normal, which wasn't actually really normal. Because if you look throughout world history, that was like, whoa, banner economic growth. That's not really common. A common historical occurrence. So now we're dealing with the limitations of the welfare state, and how we go about solving those issues is still the subject of much and very heated debate. So Eastern European nations were defined by their relationships with the Soviet Union, which oscillated between repression and limited reform. That is, until Mikhail Gorbachev, his policies led to the collapse of the communist government in Eastern Europe and the eventual fall of the Soviet Union. So, and that happened with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Central and Eastern European nations within the Soviet bloc followed an economic model based on central planning, extensive social welfare, and specialized production among bloc members. This has hindered their economic growth to a large degree. After 1956, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev's de-Stalinization policies failed to meet their economic goals within the Soviet Union, and this prompted a great number of revolts within Eastern Europe, hastening the end of the Soviet Union and the communist blockade. Following a long period of economic stagnation, Gorbachev's internal reforms of the perestroika and the glasnost, designed to make the Soviet system more flexible, failed to stave off the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of its hegemonic control over Eastern and Central European satellites. Basically, the damage from Khrushchev was too significant for Mikhail Gorbachev to overcome. Perhaps if he had taken office sooner, he might have been able to salvage it, but there was too much damage. It was too far gone. The rise of new nationalisms in Central and Eastern Europe brought peaceful revolution in most countries, but resulted in war and genocide in the Balkans and instability in some former Soviet republics. So again, just like in World War I, we're back to problems with the Balkans. That's just a troublesome area in terms of, world problems. That is the end of part 2, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in part 3.